this video, I am going to Yesterplay Collectibles in search of horror/spooky video games. With Halloween only a few days away, I had to stop by and see what I could find. So come along with me and see what games I pick up, what I pass on, and if I found enough horror games for Halloween or not. So I headed into Yesterplay Collectibles on a rainy day, which is perfect because we are in search of horror or spooky games because Halloween is this week. So come along with me and see what we can find. First off, I made my way to the Xbox wall where I found Doom 3. Then I kept looking a little bit more and ended up finding Grabbed by the Ghoulies, which is a game I've got my eye on for sure, as well as the Haunted Mansion here, but then I kept looking through the Xbox original section where I ended up spotting the House of the Dead 3. Now, there are a few copies here, so I ended up picking the best copy for the best price, and then I looked some more here and made my way to the Xbox 360 section after I spotted this Van Helsing game. But there wasn't too much other than that in the Xbox original section, so I made my way to the 360 section and found Alan Wake right away, which I had to pick up. I had this Alien game, so I didn't end up grabbing that, but I looked around a little bit more, and that's when I ended up finding The Darkness, which I recently picked up as well. So I didn't need that, or Dead Rising, or Dead Island. All of these games were right here because of the word dead, but that is what it is. I even found Dead Space as well as this Castlevania game. But so far, only Xbox original games and the Alan Wake caught my eye. Then I ended up looking a little bit more here, and that is when I found The Evil Within, and then down below I kept searching and searching for stuff. I had a list now, but so far Left 4 Dead is a great one, but I've got that. So far I've only grabbed 2 games. I'm not going to tell you everything that I picked up right off the bat here, but in the Xbox 360 section, of course, there's a bunch of Resident Evils, which is awesome to see, but surprisingly, I have all of the ones that were here, and even this Walking Dead game there. So I continued to look around here towards the bottom, and then I made my way back to the PlayStation wall. I didn't find anything on the PS1 section to the left, and then in the PS2 section here, I only ended up finding 2 games that were interesting to me that weren't in the glass case, which we'll get to later. First off was this Evil Dead game, but it was just the loose disc, so I put that behind and found this game called Extermination. Honestly, I don't really know too much about this, but upon looking at it, it definitely looks like a game I am interested in, so I looked at whatever would be the best copy and ended up grabbing that there. And then I made my way over to this wall, which is actually where the PlayStation 3 games are. And I found a bunch of awesome ones here. They've got Condemned there, another copy of Dead Island. And then I kept looking, and you could see there's a bunch right here that were definitely worth it. But I already have those in my collection, and I'm not trying to rebuy games. Fear is an awesome game, but I've already got it for the 360, so I didn't end up grabbing it here. I kind of looked around a little bit more and didn't really find too much until I stumbled upon The Last of Us. I'm calling this kind of spooky because of the zombies, obviously. Then I ended up finding Medieval Moves, which is a surprisingly cheap game, but Medieval was an awesome game, so I saw that and wanted to point it out. Then I made my way over to the Wii section, which surprisingly, the Wii doesn't have very many spooky horror games that aren't super expensive. I found this Ghostbusters game, but honestly, I already have this one, so I was kind of just being funny here, because you'll understand why that was funny in a little bit once we get to the glass cases, so stick around to the end to see that. But I kind of kept looking through this Wii section, and I didn't really find anything, unfortunately, which is bound to see because those spooker games are going to be in the glass case anyways. So I kind of wandered around one more row here, and then down below is actually where the Wii U and GameCube section was, which again, I was hoping to maybe find a GameCube game here on the wall, or maybe a random like Zombie U, even though I have it for the Wii U. But there wasn't anything here, which is kind of a bummer. This whole wall didn't have any spooky game other than Ghostbusters. So I made my way over here towards the Super Nintendo section, where I looked and looked for games that were on my list. And unfortunately, Out of This World, I think, counts, but I already have it for my collection, so I didn't need it there. So I kept looking and made my way down to the NES games, where they actually had a few here that I saw and had to note. Fester's Quest obviously falls in line here, but obviously I have that game. That game is ridiculous. Then I kind of looked a little bit more, didn't really find anything, and towards, I think this might count. I don't know anything about this, but it was named The Conspiracy, so maybe if you know, let me know. Obviously, Friday the 13th is a good spooky horror kind of game. It's not too scary on the NES, but it is on there. And then we've got Ghouls and Ghosts there. I looked around towards the bottom of the next row, but it was pretty much all Super Mario Bros. There was Xevious, which kind of counts, but I'm not going to count it. I looked up here and turned to the glass case, where I did end up checking it out a little bit, and I kind of looked through here. I looked through the NES section, made my way to the Super Nintendo section. I thought about getting Super Ghouls and Ghosts, but then I looked at my collection and I realized I actually have that already. It was on my list to pick up, but I realized I had it when I saw the label. I was like, oh, I already have this. So I passed on that and made my way to the Nintendo 64 section here on the left. And there weren't really any spooky horror games that were here that I didn't have. So BioFreaks counts, but I already have it, so I didn't get it. Then I ended up looking at the top shelf here, which is where I ended up finding some good stuff. There's a bunch of GameCube games up here where I kind of looked around, and that's when I ended up finding Resident Evil here for $30, and then Geist as well for $40, which is not a bad deal. And then right to the right of that was actually Monster Party for the NES for $20, which was great. And then I kind of walked around the corner here of the glass case and started looking through the Xbox original and the PS2 here and the PS3. They did, however, have some horror games here on this section, but honestly, nothing that kind of jumped out to me. There were a few, but nothing that was on my list that I had to find. So I looked around here. I did end up finding one PlayStation 1 game, which you'll have to wait and see what I ended up picking up towards the very end. And then I got to the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One games and the Xbox original games up here. I looked for a little bit. I moved these boxes out of the way, and that's when I realized there was actually a bunch more here that were interesting, like Never Dead caught my eye. There's the Saw game, which is super expensive. I thought about getting it, but ended up passing on it ultimately. There's some Left 4 Dead's there. Then I kept looking towards the Xbox original, where they ended up having Stubbs the Zombie, which is an awesome game. If you've never played that, you definitely should. Then there's a Phantom Dust. I kept looking, and there's a Gauntlet Dark Legacy, or maybe Call of the Cthulhu, but ultimately, or that Buffy game, but ultimately there wasn't anything that I had to absolutely grab there. I went back down and kind of looked to see if maybe I missed anything in this PS2 section, but I didn't see anything, so I continued on to this next glass case, which is the last one that they have here with games in it. I got to the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color games, and that's when I found the Castlevania Adventure, and then right below that was Aliens Thanatos Encounter, which was pretty awesome. And then I made my way down to the Nintendo Switch games, where, if you remember earlier, I had found that Ghostbusters game on the Wii. I believe I found the remake of that for the Switch. So I ended up picking up that for $25, which is awesome there. And then I ended up checking out kind of the top of the glass case here to see if there was maybe anything else I could find. And I did end up spotting a few DS and 3DS games. Obviously, I think Luigi's Mansion counts here, but ultimately, I've already got those games. A few DS games here, but usually I don't like 3DS or DS games loose if I don't have to. So then I ended up talking to the owner. He came over and was like, okay, what can I grab for you? And then he ended up grabbing me a bunch of games out of this case. Obviously, the GameCube games there. Then he ended up getting me, they had 2 copies of the Nightmare Creatures, and he ended up grabbing the best disc with the best manual and kind of merging those together for me, which was absolutely awesome. Then he ended up grabbing me the Game Boy games in that next case, which was totally cool. We were kind of talking. He pulled out the stand that they were on and said, okay, here you go. Let's see what we can do for you. And if I was interested. And so I said yes. So I took my stack of games up to the front here and checked out and ended up buying a bunch of awesome horror games. So it's time to talk about everything I got. I think I ended up spending about $350 on all of these games, but there's 2 games that we're counting that don't count as all towards the horror section, but those were some fun games too. If you want to see those, stick around to the end. But starting off with the Game Boy games, we ended up getting the Castlevania Adventure, which was absolutely awesome. I've wanted to grab this for my Game Boy collection for a while now, so I'm glad that I definitely finally got that. And then next was an expensive Game Boy Color game, and that was Aliens Thanatos Encounter. I had seen this game and was like, okay, I might be interested in that. Then I looked up the gameplay, and this looks like a ton of fun. So I don't really know much about it, but it's an alien game, so I'm bound to at least have some fun with it. And then we've got ourselves the rest of the games here. Like I said, I found that Wii version of the Ghostbusters game. Then I found the Switch version for 25 bucks. I have no clue if this game is fun or not, but it's a Ghostbusters game on the Switch, so I figured for 25 bucks I'd pick it up and see if it was even worth it. And then I ended up finding this really clean copy of Monster Party. Now, I already have this game, but the one I have is pretty beat up, and this is a much better copy. So for $20, I said, okay, the condition of this is pretty nice, so I ended up grabbing that. And then I ended up finding Nightmare Creatures for the PlayStation 1, like you saw. He opened it up and was like, okay, we've got 2 copies of this. Let me find the best disc for you and we'll pair it with the best manual. He did me a solid for this one, so I'm definitely glad there. And then we've got those awesome GameCube titles here, starting out with Resident Evil. This is the Player's Choice one, which I know a lot of people would kind of shy away from. But I actually don't have the Player's Choice one in my collection, so I figured this one would be a good one to pick up for the video and for my collection, since I don't actually have it on the Greatest Hits version. And then I ended up finding Geist. Now, I've seen this game before, and it looks really interesting and weird, but I've never actually played it before, so I'm definitely gonna have to try this out in my GameCube back there pretty soon. Maybe this week, but this thing, when I saw it, I was like, okay, I've got to pick that up. Then we made my way to the Xbox 360 games here, or the Xbox original games. Let's talk about these first. And I ended up finding the House of the Dead 3. Now, they ended up having 2 different copies, and I think for 20 bucks, this one was just missing the manual. I thought that was worth it. To save a little bit of money, I didn't necessarily need the manual, because I think I have a copy of this already, but I didn't see it on my list, so if I don't have it, that's okay, but if I do, at least, hopefully this is a better copy. And then I ended up finding Grabbed by the Ghoulies. This game looks totally awesome and right up my alley. It even says the creators of Donkey Kong Country and Banjo-Kazooie. This is a Rare game, which is pretty cool. I've never actually played this, but anytime I see it, I always see the cover and I'm like, okay, that looks like a game I would enjoy. So I've got to play this one as well pretty soon. And then I ended up picking up Extermination here, which is a weird and wacky looking game. I'm not sure if I know anything about it other than the artwork on the back, but for 20 bucks, I figured I'd grab this. I know I don't have this, So that was cool. And then I ended up getting one Xbox 360 game that was a kind of spooky horror game, and that was Alan Wake. I think I already have this one, but this one was in such good condition for $10. I figured I'd grab this. If I don't have it, okay, but if I do, I think this is a better copy anyways. So that was definitely awesome. And then, since I was already there and looking, I stumbled upon two games that caught my eye that weren't horror, and I'm just gonna throw these in at the end just for fun. I ended up finding Afro Samurai. I don't know too much about this, but it looks like a ton of fun. It looks like it's cel-shaded, maybe. If I'm wrong there, please forgive me. I don't know anything about this, but this looks pretty fun. And then last but not least, I found this Mobile Suit Gundam game. It's a Japanese game, and I looked on the back, and it's an awesome looking Gundam game, which is right up my alley. For $25, I figured I'd go ahead and grab this. It was complete, which is awesome. But again, this is one of those I don't know too much about, but it looked really fun, so I ended up grabbing it while I was there. So there you have it. These were all the spooky horror games I ended up picking up for Halloween, which is only a few days away. I hope these games kind of get you in the mood and can maybe give you a game to pick out to play. If you don't have these games, maybe go to a local game store and check them out. But overall, I'm pretty happy with all of these games that I found. Like I said, I took a big list with me, and I found some really good games. So shout out to Yesterplay Collectibles, which is a local game store slash collectible store, which is totally awesome. The guys that run it and own it are cool dudes. They always hook me up, and they're awesome to deal with. So if you're in the area, go check that out and buy some games and tell them I said what's up. But other than that, I've got a bunch of horror Halloween games, and I've got to play some before Halloween gets here, so I got to get out of here, so check that video out if you haven't already. But I think I might need to play Grabbed by the Ghoulies after this. I think that's a perfect game that's weird and wacky, and for me is probably the first thing I put into a console to play. But enough about that. I've got to get out of here, so check that video out if you haven't already.